In 1995, 6 cheerleaders left a high school gym in Arizona after placing second at regionals. They never came home. No wreck, no signs of struggle, just silence. And for 20 years, that silence held, until a hiker's dog caught a scent in the desert and uncovered something no one was meant to find. What came next unraveled the truth we'd all stopped believing would ever come. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name is Marissa Green. I live in Chandler, Arizona. I've worked at the same accounting firm for over 25 years. I know my neighbors by name, and I used to keep a garden in the backyard, mostly roses and sunflowers. I'm 56 now, but in my mind I've stayed frozen at 36, the age I was the night my daughters disappeared. April and Amber were 14, both on the cheer squad at Hamilton High. Fraternal twins, but close in that quiet, instinctive way that always felt unshakable. They were the kind of girls who still hugged me goodnight, who left notes on the fridge saying where they were going and never missed curfew. We were ordinary, solid, until the night everything cracked. For a long time, mornings were the hardest. The stillness of the kitchen, the sound of the coffee machine, the place where their backpacks used to land after school. But eventually, grief finds a rhythm. You carry it with you not because it gets lighter, but because there's no other choice. Then came this morning, 20 years later. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the Arizona sun pouring through the blinds, casting long slats of light across the floor. David was across from me, buried in the paper. Our house was quiet, too quiet. I'd stopped expecting anything to change. And then my phone buzzed. At first, I didn't look, thought it might be a coworker, but something, maybe instinct, made me check. And there it was, Detective Holbrook. I hadn't seen his name in over a decade. Not since he quietly stepped away from the case. His hair had gone gray like David's, like mine. But I remembered his voice the second I heard it. "Mrs. Green," he said, calm but firm. "I hope I'm not disturbing your morning." "No," I told him, my hand shaking. "Not at all." He paused. "We have an update, one we believe is significant. I'd rather not explain over the phone. Could you and your husband come in as soon as possible?" David was already watching me. He knew. He didn't say a word, just grabbed his keys. We didn't eat. We didn't speak much on the drive. Chandler had changed over the years, new roads, new storefronts. But in that moment, it felt like we were being pulled backward. Like time had folded in on itself and we were right back at the beginning again. When we pulled into the station parking lot, I saw other familiar cars, parents I hadn't spoken to in years. Linda and Robert Thompson, Judith and Michael Lee, Susan Collins, Elena and Peter Rivera, all of us drawn to the same place by the same impossible hope. Detective Holbrook met us in the conference room. His face was lined, his expression unreadable, but his voice was steady when he said, "A hiker found something early this morning, out in the Sonoran Desert. We believe it's connected to your daughter's case." And that was the moment everything began to move again. 20 years of silence, and something had finally surfaced. We followed Detective Holbrook's car out of Chandler just before noon. There were 5 other cars behind us, all carrying parents who had been waiting just as long as we had. No one spoke over the radio, and David kept both hands tight on the wheel, his eyes locked on the road ahead. The city gave way to open desert, fast strip malls, and gas stations, fading into scrub and dust and pale rock under the white Arizona sun. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the paved road turned to gravel and we finally pulled off near a white tent in the distance. We parked alongside a line of police cruisers. There were already crime scene markers out yellow tape strung between metal stakes, a few uniformed officers standing by, and something under the tent I couldn't yet see. I glanced at David and he nodded like he already knew I needed to go first. We stepped out together and walked toward it slowly. The heat hit harder out there, thick, flat, and dry, the kind that presses down on your skin and hums in your ears. The others followed behind us, some whispering to each other, others silent. I remember thinking how empty the land was, how a place so open could still feel like it was holding secrets underground. Detective Holbrook met us just outside the tape. His face was drawn but calm. He nodded toward a man standing a little ways off, a lean, middle-aged hiker with sun-dark skin and a quiet dog at his side. "This is Chris Delaney," the detective said. "He and his dog Dusty were out here this morning when they found it." Chris stepped forward, shook each of our hands. He didn't say much, just that his dog wouldn't stop digging at something buried shallow under a rock. He said he was sorry, said he hoped it meant answers. I thanked him, barely getting the words out. Then the detective led us into the tent. The suitcase was sitting on a folding table. It was old, the metal rusted in streaks along the handle and corners. The top had been pulled open, and inside were several red and white pieces of fabric. Cheer uniforms, folded neatly but coated in dust. I moved closer without realizing it. My eyes locked on the faded stitching Hamilton High's colors, no question. My daughters had worn those. All 6 of the girls had. Susan Collins let out a sound and covered her mouth. The others just stared, frozen. One of the forensic techs stepped forward and told us gently that based on the condition of the suitcase and the way it was buried, they believed it had only been placed there recently, maybe within the past year. David asked what that meant. The detective said quietly, "We're trying to figure that out." A few minutes later, we noticed movement beyond the police perimeter, 2 vehicles approaching, one, a news van, and the other, a dark sedan. The van didn't surprise me. This case had made headlines before, and any time there was a rumor of progress, someone always showed up. But the sedan caught my attention. As it pulled to a stop and the driver stepped out, my stomach dropped. Vincent Carraway, the cheer coach from back then. He was older now, gray at the temples, still lean and polished, the kind of man who always looked like he was about to walk into a meeting. He saw us and came straight over. "Marissa." "David," he said. "I came as soon as I heard." Holbrook shook his hand. Thanked him for coming. I didn't say much, just kept watching his face. He looked at the uniforms like someone looking at an old yearbook photo, nostalgic maybe, detached. The detective explained that they'd be releasing a statement to the press soon, that the public had helped once before, and maybe now someone would remember something useful. The reporters started setting up near the tape line. One of them approached and asked to interview the parents. We all agreed, one by one. When it was our turn, David and I stood together in front of the camera, trying not to fall apart. I said something about hope, about how we'd never stopped searching. If our daughters were out there somewhere, I wanted them to know we hadn't given up. David added that even if it only led to closure, we needed to know. After the interviews, I realized I'd left my camera and water bottle in the car. I wanted to take better photos of the site, something detailed, something real to keep. My phone wouldn't capture it the same way. David offered to walk back with me. We told the detective, and he reminded us to stay on the path. "It's easy to get turned around out here," he said. "And we don't need any more missing people today. We promised we'd be careful." The sun was harsher on the walk back. The desert stretched in all directions, flat and hot, and full of the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. I was scanning the ridgeline when I saw it, a truck partially hidden by a slope of rock and 2 men moving nearby. One was dragging something. The other was crouched by a cluster of cacti. I touched David's arm. "Do you see that?" He followed my gaze, squinting. "There's someone in the truck too," he said. "What the hell are they doing out here?" "They're too far from the trails," I said. I couldn't stop looking. "And why is that guy dragging something?" I started walking toward them. Marissa David hissed, catching up to me. "What are you doing?" "You heard the detective. I just want to see." I told him. "Something feels off." We didn't get far before the men noticed us. One of them shouted. The man dragging the sack heaved it into the bed of the truck. The other sprinted back from the rocks. In seconds, all three were inside, and the truck peeled out tires, throwing up dust as they sped away. I tried to snap a photo, but it was too fast. All I caught was a blur. But just before they vanished, I saw a logo in the corner of the back window, a company sticker. I couldn't read it, but I remembered the shape. A bird, maybe. 3 letters underneath. C. something. David and I reached the spot where they'd been. There was a hole in the ground, fresh. David knelt and brushed the dirt aside until something small and metallic caught the light. He picked it up and held it out to me. A single earring, silver, tarnished with a red stone in the center. I recognized it immediately. I'd bought matching pairs for both girls on their 13th birthday. April had a star with blue. Amber chose red. I took it from his palm with shaking hands. "It's Amber's," I whispered. We searched the area around it, hoping to find something else, another piece of jewelry, a tag, anything. But whatever had been there was gone. The men had cleaned up fast. Still, I knew we had to get back. We had to show the detective. When we returned, Holbrook was speaking with a forensic tech. I called out to him, told him what we'd seen, handed him the earring. He studied it in silence, then looked at us both. "Where exactly did you find this?" David explained. Told him about the truck, the men, the direction they'd gone. I told him about the logo I saw on the rear window. He asked if we recognized it. We didn't. He asked if I could draw it. I did my best, 3 letters inside a bird's wing, CPF. One of the other parents, Linda Thompson, spoke up. "That sounds like Caraway Performance and Fitness." Everyone turned toward the coach. He held up his hands. "That was my company," he said. "I sold it 20 years ago, before the girls disappeared." The detective took that in writing something down, to who he asked. A man named Matthew Rands Caraway said. "I stayed on as a consultant for a while, but I haven't been involved in years." It was hard to say what shifted in the room after that. No one said anything, but I could feel the air change. The detective told us to show them exactly where we'd found the earring. He was sending a team to track the tire marks before the desert wind wiped them away. He told us to wait at base camp. No more walking off alone. This time I didn't argue. As we followed the officer back toward the camp, I kept one hand tight around the earring in my pocket. The metal was warm from the sun, rough from the years, but I knew what it meant. I knew we were closer than we'd ever been. And somewhere out there, someone knew we were coming. The detective didn't say much when we handed him the earring. He studied it under the sun, turning it slowly between his fingers, then called over a crime scene tech and slipped it into a small evidence bag. I could tell he was trying to stay composed, but there was a shift in his voice, more clipped, more focused. He asked exactly where we'd found it, and we showed him on the printed site map. The spot was about half a mile from where the suitcase had been uncovered. Then he asked again about the men we saw, the truck, the logo. I told him everything I could remember, the shape of the bird's wings, the placement of the letters. David added that the truck didn't have a license plate, at least not one we could see. One of the other fathers, Michael Lee, sketched the logo from memory, and when he held it up, I felt my chest tighten. It looked just like the one I'd tried to describe. Linda Thompson stepped forward and said quietly, "That's Caraway Performance and Fitness." All eyes turned to Vincent Caraway, who stood off to the side with his arms crossed. He didn't flinch, just gave a small nod and said, "That was my company. I sold it 20 years ago." The detective looked up from his notes. "To whom Matthew Rands Caraway said." He kept the name and some of the branding. "I stayed on as a consultant for a few years, then stepped away. I haven't had any involvement in over a decade." It was said evenly, like it was just another piece of paperwork. Detective Holbrook nodded, but didn't let it drop. He asked for the buyer's full name, any contact information, dates of sale, everything. Caraway didn't resist. He offered to forward the original record, said he still had access to some of the old files. To anyone watching, it might have seemed cooperative. But I kept thinking about the way he looked at the uniforms earlier. Quiet, unreadable, like someone remembering something he hadn't expected to see again. The field team left soon after with a small group of officers to check the location David and I had pointed out. The detective asked us to stay at the base camp. He made it clear no more walking off alone. Chris Delaney, the hiker, offered to guide them, but Holbrook declined. "We appreciate the help," he said, "but we can't involve civilians beyond this point." Chris nodded and gave me a soft pat on the arm before walking back to his truck with Dusty at his side. The rest of us stayed behind, drinking bottled water under the canvas tents and watching the desert for signs of movement. It felt like the air had thickened. No one was talking much anymore. After an hour, we still hadn't heard anything. David and I left with the other families and headed to a nearby diner the officers had recommended. There wasn't much else nearby, just a gas station, a general store, and a single strip of buildings that hadn't been updated since the 90s. The diner was quiet, cool inside with red vinyl booths and ceiling fans that creaked as they turned. We slid into a booth at the back, away from the windows. A middle-aged waitress brought us menus and coffee. I ordered soup, but I couldn't bring myself to eat. David picked at his sandwich, saying we needed something in our stomachs in case the day got longer. I just kept replaying that moment in the desert, the men throwing the sack in the truck bed, the one crouching near the rocks, the shape of the earring in David's palm. That wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. I don't remember exactly what I was saying when the waitress came back to check on us, but I glanced up at her and something small caught my eye. A flash of silver just below her ear. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have, then leaned forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low. "That earring, where did you get it?" She touched it instinctively, the way people do when they forget they're wearing jewelry. "This old thing, a customer gave it to me years ago. Said it matched my eyes. It's missing the other one, though. He said he lost it somewhere, but told me I could keep the one if I liked it." I looked at David. He was already staring. The earring was identical to the one we found in the desert. Same silver shape, same red gem at the center. My voice was shaking when I told her. I didn't care how strange it sounded. "I found the matching one this morning," I said, "in the sand, near where some men were digging. It belonged to my daughter. She disappeared 20 years ago." The waitress didn't speak at first. She looked between us like she was trying to decide if we were serious. David stepped in, softening his voice, trying not to scare her off. "We're not accusing you of anything. We just need to know, do you remember the man who gave it to you?" She nodded slowly, eyes darting toward the kitchen. "I don't know his name, but I've seen him a few times over the years. He's a friend of Gerald Laffinger, the man who owns that big ranch about 10 miles from here. We deliver catering to his property every day." I felt the breath leave my body. David asked quietly, "Are you delivering to him today?" The waitress checked her watch. "Yeah, I'm due there in about 20 minutes. She looked down at our table. "I'm not supposed to give out customer info. I could lose my job. But if someone were to follow me on a public road, well, I can't control that, can I?" I thanked her. I promised we wouldn't say her name to anyone. She nodded once, then slipped away to the back. We paid quickly and headed out to the parking lot. As we were leaving, David spotted Chris Delaney across the street fueling up his truck. Dusty was watching us from the front seat. But before we could cross over, the waitress came out the side door with her insulated delivery bags. She didn't look at us, just loaded the bags into the carrier box on her small delivery bike and drove off down the road. We followed from a distance, keeping a few car lengths back. The desert opened wide again. No buildings, no traffic. After 15 minutes, she turned onto a dirt road marked by a rusted sign, Laffinger Ranch private property. David kept driving, then pulled off once we were out of sight. We sat in silence, watching from a ridge that gave us a view of the gate. The property was huge, fenced with iron cameras on every post. Beyond the main house were outbuildings, stables, and a few low structures we couldn't identify. The delivery was dropped off with a security guard. The amount of food was enough for a crowd. Definitely more than one man could eat alone. David leaned over. What kind of ranch needs catering like that? Every day, we stayed there for a while. The waitress left with her empty bags, never once looking back. We were about to turn around when the ranch gate creaked open again. A blue Jeep rolled out. Inside were 3 men, same clothes, same faces as the ones we saw in the desert. They passed within feet of us. I made eye contact with the man in the back seat. His face didn't change, but I knew. He recognized me. He turned and spoke to the driver. The Jeep slowed, then made a wide turn. They were coming back. David pulled onto the road, trying to stay calm. "They're following us," he said. The Jeep accelerated. In minutes, they caught up. One hard swerve and they were in front of us, forcing our car to stop. Doors opened. The 3 men stepped out. 2 more vehicles were coming from behind, heading straight from the ranch. David's hands were on the wheel. "What do we do?" he asked. I didn't have an answer. We were boxed in. One of the men barked at us to get out. We did. Slowly. Hands up. Another one asked why we'd been watching the property. I told him the truth. "My name is Marissa Green. This is my husband, David. Our daughters disappeared 20 years ago. We think someone at your ranch knows what happened." The man didn't respond, just spoke into a radio clipped to his chest. "We have the couple. The ones from the desert." A voice crackled back. "Bring them in." They took our phones, our keys, our wallets, loaded us into one of the trucks and drove us through the gate. As the ranch disappeared behind us, swallowed by dust and silence, I couldn't tell if we were walking into danger or finally getting close to the truth. We were driven across the ranch in one of those SUVs, the dust from the dirt road trailing behind us like a curtain we couldn't escape. The sun was relentless, glaring off the polished metal of the vehicle's frame and casting sharp shadows through the windows. The silence inside was heavy. No one said a word, but I could feel every muscle in David's body tense beside me. When we finally stopped, the men pulled us out and led us inside the main house through a side entrance I never expected I'd see. The walls were lined with Western-themed paintings, cowboys riding horses, desert landscapes bathed in sunset light. The scent of polished wood and leather filled the air. Everything was too neat, too staged, like a museum made to hide something darker beneath. They took us down a long hallway, passing closed doors and thick carpets. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as we entered what looked like a study bookshelves, heavy with old leather-bound volumes, a large desk dominating the room and windows framing distant mountains. The contrast between the serene view and what I feared was happening behind those walls was almost unbearable. One of the men ordered us to wait and then started searching us, taking away our phones, wallets, and keys. I felt stripped of every piece of control, everything that connected me to the outside world. The door slammed shut behind them, locked tight. David immediately tried to open it, but it was no use. "They've trapped us," he said quietly, voice taut. "We should have called the police." I nodded, but I knew it was too late. We were alone, locked in this quiet room where nothing was within reach. No weapon, no phone, no escape. Just the echo of our breathing and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Minutes stretched out like hours before footsteps approached. The door swung open to reveal a man who looked like he belonged in a different era. A silver-haired man in his 60s, dressed in an expensive suit that didn't belong in a desert ranch. His smile was polite but cold, the kind that doesn't reach his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Green," he said smoothly. "I'm Gerald Laffinger. I understand you've been asking about me." I stepped forward, fighting the panic rising in my chest. "Where are our daughters? Have you seen them?" My voice was steady but desperate. Laffinger studied us for a long moment, then leaned casually on the desk. Straight to the point. I respect that. But you must understand information comes at a very high price. There was amusement in his tone, but it was dark-edged with warning. What price, I asked. We'll pay anything. Just tell us where April and Amber are. He chuckled a low, humorless sound. It's not about money. But since you've uncovered more than you should, I don't have many choices left. He stood and nodded to the men waiting outside. Take them to special accommodations. Make sure they're comfortable. They'll be staying here a while. One of the men hesitated. Are you sure? He asked. Laffinger's eyes hardened. I'll let the old dancing man decide what to do with them. David's hands shot out in protest. You can't do this. People will come looking. Police know we were following a lead. Laffinger laughed a cold, dismissive sound. Don't worry about them. Accidents happen out here all the time. A car goes off the road, hits a rock, ruptures the gas tank. Very tragic. No one will come looking for you. We were dragged from the house across the sun-baked yard toward a large horse barn. At first glance, it looked normal. Stalls feed bags equipment. But at the far end, behind a supply closet, one of the men opened a door to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. They shoved David forward. I followed the air growing cooler and damper as we went down. At the bottom was a heavy metal door secured with an electronic lock. One of the men punched in a code and the door swung open to a bunker. It was like stepping into another world. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Cots lined up against one side, a small kitchenette tucked in the corner and a bathroom behind a partial wall. But what caught my attention immediately were the three women sitting quietly on the cots watching us with wary eyes. They looked thin, pale, like they hadn't seen daylight in years. Their clothes hung loose, their expressions guarded. I froze, breath catching in my throat. One of the women finally spoke, her voice soft and hesitant. Who are you? Before I could answer, the door opened again. Laffinger stepped inside, surveying the scene with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This, he said, is the price of information. You'll have plenty of time to learn the truth. Welcome to your new home. He turned to the women. Meet your new roommates. The women flinched at his words. One looked away, hiding tears. Laffinger left, locking the door behind him with the sound of multiple bolts sliding home. His footsteps echoed away, his voice rising in anger just before he disappeared upstairs. That damn dancing man, he muttered. Get me a call with Matthew and Caraway. I hope Caraway isn't already talking to the cops. The mention of that name hit me like a punch. Vincent Caraway, the coach. The man we'd all hoped had nothing to do with this nightmare. When Laffinger was gone, I turned back to the women. Please, I whispered. Help us get these ropes off. They exchanged uncertain looks. One of them stood turning her back to us. Her thin shirt didn't hide the scars, thousands of lines crisscrossed across her skin. Evidence of beatings. This is what happens when we don't follow the rules, she said quietly. If we help you, it will only get worse. I swallowed hard, my eyes filling with tears. I'm so sorry, I said. But please, do you know April and Amber? They're my daughters. They disappeared 20 years ago with the rest of your cheer squad. Do you know them? The woman froze. Her eyes widened as if recognizing me. Then she turned slowly. Mom, she whispered. My heart stopped. I'm April, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. David gasped. April. I barely breathed her name, reaching out as she knelt to untie my wrists. She warned us to be quiet. The men monitored the bunker sometimes. As the ropes fell away, I looked at her face, the woman my daughter had become. Tired, scared, but still my daughter. She told us what happened, how only 3 of them survived April Kira Thompson and Hannah Lee. Rachel Collins died years ago from an untreated infection. Amber and Lily were killed trying to escape. They'd been forced to watch it happen. I closed my eyes, trying to hold back the flood. David wept beside me. April explained that Carraway and his men had drugged them after the competition. The ranch was a front for something bigger managed day to day by Laffinger and a man named Matthew Rands. Carraway visited regularly and controlled everything. Gunshots echoed from above. We banged on the pipes, screamed for help. After what felt like hours, police arrived. The metal door finally opened and we were free. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time in 20 years, we were together again. There was no way to take in the weight of what April had just told us, not fully, not right away. She was working to free David's wrists while she whispered details in bursts, checking the stairs every so often to make sure no one was coming. The other two women, Kira and Hannah, moved quietly around us, always cautious, never raising their voices above a murmur. The air inside that bunker was thick stale. My mouth felt dry no matter how many sips of water I took from the tin cup April handed me. David asked if there were any tools, any exits besides the door at the top of the stairs. April shook her head, her voice tight. "We tried everything. There's no other way out." She explained that the guards rotated shifts, but Laffinger and Carraway never showed up without warning. They all watched each other constantly. She pointed to a small security camera in the corner disguised in the ceiling's molding. "They say it doesn't work, but you never know." I caught myself looking over my shoulder, feeling the old instinct return to stay alert, to keep moving, not to trust the quiet. We were all startled by a sudden bang above a heavy sound like a door being slammed. Kira drew in close, whispering that noise like that sometimes meant someone new was arriving or that someone was leaving angry. My nerves stretched thin with every footstep overhead. April told us what had changed in the weeks before we found them. There'd been more arguments between Laffinger and Carraway, their voices drifting down through the floor vents. April said Carraway had wanted evidence, destroyed uniforms, keepsakes, anything that could connect him back to the girls. Laffinger had grumbled, called it unnecessary, but in the end things started disappearing. Old journals, a backpack, a faded set of pom-poms. They'd always wondered if maybe some small trace would slip through the cracks and lead someone here. That's when I realized the truth. The cheerleading uniforms and Amber's earring, they were clues someone tried to bury too late. The desert, the suitcase, the men cleaning up. The reason that suitcase was buried shallow, the reason those men were so anxious the morning we arrived. I gripped April's hand, told her about the suitcase and how Chris Delaney's dog had uncovered it. I watched something shift in her face, not hope exactly, but maybe the first shadow of it. David pressed for more. "April, did any of the men ever talk about letting someone go? Did they mention moving you somewhere else?" She shook her head. "No. Not since Amber and Lily. Not since they died." Her voice fell away at the end and Kira put a hand on her shoulder. "They said they'd never risk it again, that it was too dangerous. The only thing they talked about was hiding the rest of the evidence before the police could find it." We started comparing every detail we could remember. The company name on the truck, the logo Matthew Rands Laffinger's catering deliveries. The fragments came together like pieces of a puzzle nobody wanted to finish. The men who ran the ranch were careful but not perfect. Even the waitress at the diner had mentioned that a customer gave her one of the earrings thinking it was nothing. David said softly, "If she hadn't worn it, if Chris's dog hadn't sniffed out the suitcase, none of this." He trailed off, letting the thought hang. I understood. Sometimes the smallest thing overlooked or forgotten becomes the break that changes everything. The hours in that bunker crawled by. We whispered to conserve our voices. The women showed us how to ration food and water, how to avoid making noise, how to act when the door swung open. "Always stand up," April warned. "Never cower. Don't let them see fear. That's what they want." I did as I was told every time a shoe scuffed on the stairs or a lock clicked above. And through it all, I kept thinking about the camera, the vent, the old alarm panel in the far corner, tiny details that might mean a weakness in the prison built around us. As evening set in, a tense quiet settled. None of us could sleep. Kira sat cross-legged on her cot, telling us how she used to dream about seeing her parents again. Hannah braided April's hair, careful not to pull too hard on the tangles. I felt useless, powerless, but I took comfort in their small routines, their quiet strength. I asked April to tell me about Amber. She started slowly, then shared how Amber had been the bold one, the one who made plans for escape, who watched for guard patterns and hoarded small things that might help, bits of wire, scraps of paper, even a broken fork. She was the one who made us believe it could be done. April whispered. Even when it went wrong, she made us promise we wouldn't forget what happened, that we'd find a way to let the truth out. I think that's what kept me going. That and the faint hope that someone on the outside was still searching. At some point, after another loud noise from above, I crawled over to the far wall and pressed my ear to the cool concrete, listening for anything. Footsteps, vehicles, even just the wind. I heard nothing, but the act itself felt like a lifeline. You start looking for signs wherever you can. Later that night, while we tried to rest, April noticed something odd, a flicker of light from the gap under the heavy metal door, moving in a strange pattern. It was almost like a signal. 3 quick blinks, then darkness, then again. She nudged me awake, pointing. "That's not normal," she said. "They never do that unless there's a problem with the power or unless someone is sending a message." It was the first thing in hours that didn't fit the pattern. I sat up, heart pounding, waiting to see if it would happen again. It did. This time 5 flashes, then nothing. We looked at each other, each holding our breath, each thinking the same thing: someone was out there, and they were trying to get our attention. For the first time in that dark, heavy place, the silence felt different. Something was shifting just beyond the walls, and whatever it was, it hadn't given up on us yet. That night in the bunker, we barely slept. I sat propped against the cold cinder block, listening for any shift in the house above, every tick of the fluorescent lights, every whisper between the girls. The others drifted in and out, restless but quiet. Nobody daring to hope out loud that the strange flashes under the door meant anything at all. April traced patterns on her knee, glancing over at me every now and then, as if to check that I was still there. Kira pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes open and watchful in the dimness. I couldn't settle my mind, kept circling the memory of that blinking light, the irregular sequence, the possibility of a message. At some point, the silence thickened again, broken only by a distant sound above, like muffled shouting through too many layers of earth. We all froze, straining to make sense of it. I thought I heard the slam of a heavy door, then footsteps, hard and purposeful. The women exchanged a look, no words needed. April leaned in close, her breath shaking. "That's not the usual routine. Something's wrong." The next sound was the click of the lock at the top of the stairs. The bunker door buzzed and then opened, and Gerald Laffinger himself stepped in, this time with a new kind of energy, urgent, angry, maybe even scared. His suit looked rumpled, the tie askew. His voice clipped as he ordered the girls to stand in a row. He kept his eyes on me and David, his fingers flexing at his sides. "We're moving you to another room for the night. Don't talk. Don't ask questions." The guards filed in behind him, hands hovering at their belts, no weapons visible, but plenty of menace in their posture. They led us one by one into a narrow hallway, lights flickering overhead. I could see a door at the far end, metal and marked with a keypad lock. The air in the corridor was colder than the bunker, with a faint chemical smell that made my skin prickle. When we reached the end, Laffinger paused, checked his phone, and spoke quietly to the tallest guard. Only until morning. I want them all here when Caraway arrives. That name sent a ripple through April. Her shoulders squared, her jaw set tight. The guard shoved David and me through the door first. It was another windowless space, a little smaller but clean and empty except for a folding table and a few plastic chairs. No cots, no bathroom, just a single water jug in the corner. The metal door shut behind us with a sound that echoed in my bones. We sat on the cold tile waiting. I glanced at the girls, April and Kira huddled together, Hannah kneeling by the wall tracing a seam with her fingernail, as if looking for a weakness. In that silence, every second stretched. It was hard not to think about all the ways this could end. I forced myself to focus on small details, the pattern of the tile, the scratch on the table leg, the red glow from the lock by the door. My mind kept going back to the blinking lights under the last door. Had it been a fluke? Some kind of system check? Or had someone outside really tried to send a warning? I asked April if she'd ever seen it before. She shook her head. Only twice. Both times when there were outsiders on the property, inspectors, deliveries, people who didn't know about us. That landed hard. It meant the outside world had brushed close before, and yet nothing ever broke through. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. For a while there was nothing, just the low mechanical hum of the building. Then footsteps slower, heavier. Two voices. I recognized Laffinger's low and agitated. The other I didn't know, crisp, colder, almost bored. If there's trouble, you fix it. You promised this would never be an issue. A pause. If the police are involved, it's your operation on the line, not mine. The voices faded. I felt a chill run through me. Kira stared at the door. I think that was Matthew Rands, she whispered, barely audible. He comes once a month, brings papers for Caraway. He's the only one besides Laffinger with a code to the vault. David asked quietly, Is there any way to reach him? Get a message out. April's answer was hopeless. We've tried. They keep us away from anything, a phone, a pen, even scraps of paper. But now, with Laffinger rattled and Caraway expected soon, I sensed a crack opening in the wall of routine that had held them captive all these years. We started searching the room, checking every seam, every bolt. Hannah tried the handle, then looked up at the ceiling for vents. There was a single air duct high in the corner, just wide enough for a hand. Kira climbed on the chair and reached inside, coming back with a slip of paper, yellowed, torn, but with something written in pencil, if found, call police. April Green. Kira Thompson. Hannah Lee. My heart lurched. It was a message from years earlier, tucked away in blind hope that someone would find it. We pressed it flat on the table, reading it over and over, letting the reality of it sink in. There had always been someone trying, even if the world never seemed to notice. We sat in that room for what felt like forever. The lights buzzed, footsteps passed outside, and we held each other close. The sound of distant arguing rose and fell, words too muffled to make out. Once, someone knocked hard on the wall as if testing for a false panel. David squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, promising myself that if a door opened, if any window of escape showed itself, I would take it. Near dawn, the footsteps returned louder this time. Someone typed a code into the keypad, and the door slid open. "Get up," the guard barked. "You're going back." We filed out into the hall, eyes burning from the harsh light. As we passed the entryway to the main house, I caught a glimpse of Laffinger pacing, phone to his ear, his face set with a new kind of fear. Something was unraveling above ground, and for the first time I felt it in my bones. Our world below was shifting, and the thread that kept us silent, trapped, afraid it was starting to give. When the guard led us back to the bunker, the routine felt different, hurried, almost desperate. The girls sensed it too. April held my arm, not tight, but just enough that I could feel the tremor in her hand. The hallway lights flickered as we moved, a reminder of how fragile the order here really was. The door buzzed, the lock disengaged, and we were ushered back into the familiar concrete room with its battered cots, the tin cups lined up by the sink, the same sour air that always seemed to cling to the place. But the fear in the guard's posture was new. He kept glancing back at the door like he was waiting for orders he didn't want to hear. As soon as the door shut, April turned to me, her voice low. "Something's happening." I heard them arguing Carraway's coming back, but Laffinger sounded afraid. "That never happens." I could hear the thud of footsteps overhead, hurried conversations muffled by thick flooring. The bunker felt smaller somehow. Even David, always steady, looked shaken. He paced near the far wall, stopping to check the bolts on the bathroom door, as if any part of this place might suddenly become a way out. We tried to keep busy. Hannah and Kira gathered up the few blankets, folding and refolding them in a quiet corner, their voices barely above a whisper. April pressed her ear to the air vent again. After a long moment, she looked back, eyes wide. "Police." I heard the word police. Twice. Someone's talking about the police outside. My heart thudded in my chest. We stood in a loose circle, trying to decide what to do. If police were really coming, did we risk calling out? Or was it just another dead end? Another false hope after so many years? Kira sat down hard on the edge of a cot, covering her face. "If they're here, they'll never find us. No one hears anything down here." David looked at me silent, searching for any sign of what we should do. I didn't have answers. Time moved strangely in that room. Minutes bled into hours, or maybe it was less. There's no way to mark the difference when you're underground, living by the fear in other people's voices. The arguing above grew sharper shouts and slamming doors. April knelt by the far wall, tapping a spoon in a pattern 3, then 5, then 3, again. It was a rhythm, something to hang on to, a way to remind ourselves we were still alive, still together. Suddenly, heavy steps thundered down the stairs. The electronic lock whined and the door burst open. Not the usual guard, but Laffinger himself, breathless and flushed. He looked at each of us, his expression almost wild. "Get up. All of you. Move." We stumbled to our feet, pressed together in the doorway as the guards shoved us out down the corridor toward the barn's main entry. They didn't bind our hands this time, didn't even bother with hoods or threats. Something was happening that even they couldn't control. As we were pushed up the narrow steps, a blast of daylight made us blink. I heard it before I saw it, shouting sirens, the whir of a police helicopter overhead. The barn doors were open, and outside the yard was crawling with law enforcement uniforms everywhere, weapons drawn, voices cutting through the stillness. For a second, I thought it wasn't real, that I was dreaming, the sun on my face. The chaos, the frantic energy that only comes when the world above ground finally breaks through. The officers moved in waves, one group converging on the barn, another securing the main house. I could see Chris Delaney off to one side, his dog Dusty by his feet, watching the action with wide eyes. The waitress from the diner was there too, clutching her phone, her face streaked with tears. I caught April's hand and held on tight. Police surrounded us, weapons at the ready, shouting commands. "Hands up! Identify yourselves!" My voice was raw as I tried to call out. "We're the missing girl's family. We're victims." The girls added their voices, desperate, cracking with fear. An officer moved in, lowering his rifle, radioing for medics. It all happened at once, paramedics running in hands everywhere, questions I could barely process. Where were we? How many of us? Was anyone armed? Was anyone left inside? David pointed to the barn, told them there could be other girls, other victims. The officers listened. For the first time in years, I believed help had finally arrived. As they led us away from the barn, I glanced back and saw Laffinger on the ground, face pressed into the dirt, hands cuffed behind his back. Another team of officers marched the 3 men from the desert across the yard, their faces blank eyes down. Near the driveway, I caught a glimpse of a police car with someone inside, face turned away, hair silver at the temples. My heart lurched. Caraway. Even with everything swirling around us, the weight of that name, that man, kept me from feeling anything close to relief. The truth was finally out. There was no covering it anymore. I held April as tight as I could, feeling the bones in her shoulders, the small tremor that still hadn't left her hands. The world was rushing in sirens, radios, the sound of my own heart. But beneath all of it was the quiet certainty that this was only the start. For every answer found, there were still pieces missing. The worst was over. But the story, the one we'd all lived and survived, would haunt us far beyond the fences of that ranch. And as the officers wrapped us in blankets, leading us away from the crowd, I realized I was holding something in my pocket. The slip of paper from the air vent, soft from all the hands that had pressed it flat over the years, carrying the names of girls who'd never given up on the hope that one day someone would read them out loud. At the station, everything moved in slow motion. They took us to a small interview room, sat us down together, and wrapped us in thick gray blankets that smelled faintly of bleach. April clung to my hand like she was afraid someone might tear us apart again. Hannah and Kira were brought in not long after, each of them trembling, their faces streaked with the grime and terror of what they'd endured underground. The paramedics came and went, checking vitals, shining flashlights into our eyes, asking if we could remember the last thing we'd eaten the last time we'd slept. For the first time in 20 years, I was able to look at my daughter under clean, even light, to brush a stray strand of hair from her cheek, to hear her say my name without fear that someone was listening. David never let go of her, not even for a second. The officers were gentle, deliberate, and they never pushed too hard, just asked what we needed, if we wanted water, if we could answer some questions when we were ready. Detective Holbrook came in after a while, his face ashen. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might break a tooth. He sat across from us, voice steady but softer than I'd ever heard it. "We've got Laffinger and the 3 men in custody," he said. "They won't hurt you again. But Caraway, he ran. We've already put out an all-points bulletin. We're going to find him." David nodded, his eyes red and hollow. "Don't let him disappear," he said quietly, and the detective's hand tightened on his notebook. April was the first to tell her story. She spoke in clear, careful words, starting from the last night she remembered being free after the cheer competition, the locker room, the way Caraway had called Rachel aside. She didn't try to shield us from the horror. She described the syringes, the cold floor of the bunker, the sound of the lock sliding shut, the way Rachel's illness had gone untreated. She explained what Amber did, the plans she made, how Hope was punished in that place. She listed names, hers, Kira's, Hannah's, the others who hadn't survived. I kept my hand on her knee and listened. When Detective Holbrook finally pushed his recorder across the table, she pressed the button herself. "April Michelle Green," she said. "I want everything I say to be on the record." Kira and Hannah told their stories, next voices thin and tired. The officers took notes, promised that victim advocates would meet with them, that medical help was waiting, that they wouldn't be alone. I don't remember most of what I said. I was just there to bear witness, to make sure April's truth landed somewhere outside that bunker. When we finished, the detective stepped out. I watched him through the glass, saw him talking to another officer, saw him hand over a thick folder of notes. Someone else rushed in, a federal agent, maybe in a suit too sharp for Chandler, Arizona. More men in dark jackets moved through the halls. There was a tension in the building that had nothing to do with us, a ripple of urgency and fear. Word must have gotten out. Reporters clustered on the sidewalk, their camera lights flickering against the dusk. When Detective Holbrook came back in, his expression had changed. There was a grim relief behind his eyes. "Highway Patrol just stopped Vincent Caraway outside Gallup," he told us. "He's being brought back now. I wanted to collapse. I didn't. I just held April tighter. "It's not enough," she said quietly. "It won't bring Amber back. Or Rachel. Or Lily." David nodded, and for a while we just sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the station, the rumble of voices in the hall. The rest of that night is a blur of faces and forms. The waitress from the diner was brought in, her hands shaking, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She told us she was sorry, that she never guessed what the earring meant, that she wished she could have done more. I stood and hugged her, felt the desperate relief in her embrace, told her she'd done enough, more than enough. Chris Delaney appeared in the hallway, still wearing his old hiking boots, the dust from the desert ground into every crease. He nodded at me, at David, at April. I just did what anybody would, he said, but I knew better. Without him and his dog, without that stubborn hope, we never would have found our way back to daylight. The families of the other girls arrived as word spread. Linda and Robert Thompson came for Kira, tears streaming down their faces. Michael Lee hugged Hannah so hard she nearly lost her breath. Susan Collins and the Riveras were led gently into a private room by officers. I saw their faces, saw the devastation of not getting their daughters back. There were more questions, more details to sort out about the ranch, the fake catering deliveries, the hidden rooms, the way Caraway's business had become a front for something darker and crueler than anyone outside could have guessed. The FBI came in, started combing through records following the money. Every few minutes another officer stopped by to update us. More men arrested, property seized, evidence found in locked cabinets and under false floorboards. Some of the answers were coming now, delivered in steady, clinical language, but none of them could fill the space left by what we'd lost. When the sun finally started to rise, David and I walked out with April and the others wrapped in borrowed coats, blinking against the soft new light. The world outside was louder than I remembered. Car doors slamming, engines humming, reporters calling questions we couldn't answer. Someone tried to press a microphone into April's face, but a detective blocked the way, told them to give us room. I kept my arm around her, led her to the waiting car, grateful for the small, quiet mercy of a locked door. In the days that followed, we did what we could to help the investigation. We met with the victim advocates, the doctors, the federal agents. We sat for interviews and answered questions about names, dates, small details. The ranch was torn apart, every hidden space laid bare. There was no hiding anymore. April said she felt hollow, but she didn't want to leave town yet. She needed to see Kira and Hannah, to stand with them while they faced what came next. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake to find her sitting by the window, watching the headlights roll down the highway, waiting for something to break the quiet. Justice, when it comes, never looks the way you think it will. It's not clean. It's not satisfying. It leaves you with as many questions as answers. But at least this time there were people who listened, who believed, who followed the trail all the way to the end. For the first time in 20 years, April could say her own name and be heard. That would have to be enough, at least for now. And somewhere in the early morning stillness, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world outside could become a place where my daughter would be safe again. In the weeks that followed, I found myself returning to old routines, but nothing about my life was the same. The house felt quieter, almost too quiet, as if the years of waiting had left a kind of echo in the walls. April moved into the guest room for a while. She said it helped her to hear us moving around, just to know she wasn't alone anymore. She and David would sit up late, talking softly in the kitchen, sometimes falling silent in the middle of a sentence. There were days when the grief pressed down so heavy it was hard to move, let alone talk about the future. Amber's absence filled every corner of our home, her pictures still lining the mantel, her memory too alive to be tucked away. There were no words for the pain of that loss, but there was a strange comfort in naming it, in letting ourselves remember all the little things, her laugh, her stubborn streak, the way she could light up a room with just a look. April started therapy along with Kira and Hannah. Sometimes she would let me sit in, sometimes not. It's a long road back from a place like that, but I watched her try taking small steps, reclaiming bits of her life, even finding moments to smile. Some nights she'd go out to the backyard, sit beneath the stars, and just breathe. I'd watch from the window and hope she was making peace with the world again, in her own way. The town of Chandler changed too. People stopped me in the grocery store sometimes just to say they were glad April was home, sometimes to offer awkward, heartfelt apologies for not believing, not seeing, not asking harder questions all those years ago. It was a strange comfort and a strange kind of sorrow to realize how many families have empty chairs at their tables, how many are still waiting for a call that may never come. Justice did arrive slow but certain. Laffinger and the others went to trial, and the evidence was more than enough to convict. Carraway was found hiding out in a border motel. He never made it out of state. I sat through every day of his trial. I listened to every word, every accusation, every defense, and when the verdict came down, I felt something give way inside me. It wasn't relief, not exactly. Nothing can ever truly make up for the years and lives that were taken. But there was a kind of release, a letting go, not of the memory, but of the fear that nothing would ever change. After the sentencing, we held a small memorial for Amber and the other girls. We stood under the old cottonwood at the park where the squad used to practice, each family lighting a candle, each name spoken aloud. It wasn't enough, but it was what we could do. Kira and Hannah's parents came along with Chris Delaney and the waitress from the diner. Even Detective Holbrook stopped by, his eyes tired, his handshake steady. April spoke last, her voice quiet but unwavering. She told us that survival means more than just getting through it, means remembering and refusing to let the truth be buried again. Looking back now, I see how easy it is to think that darkness only lives at the edges of other people's lives. I see how much we rely on hope, on trust, on the kindness of strangers and the stubbornness of those who refuse to give up. The hardest part isn't what was done to us. It's learning how to live with what remains. There are still nights when I wake up reaching for a daughter who isn't there. There are mornings when I find April at the kitchen table, staring out at the sunrise, quiet but present. We hold on to each other and to the lessons left behind. Memory is both a gift and a burden. Justice is imperfect, but it matters. And healing, however slow, however uneven, is possible one day at a time. If you've stayed with us through this story, thank you for listening. If someone you love is still missing, or if you're carrying a story that nobody else sees, don't let it slip away. Speak the names, share the truth. Sometimes that's how we find our way back. And if this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name is ever left behind.